The morning mist hung low over Lake Serenity like a delicate veil, its surface mirror still except for the occasional ripple caused by a fish breaking through. In the small town of Cedar Falls, Montana, this lake had been the heart of the community for generations. Families had built their homes along its shores, children had learned to swim in its crystal-clear waters, and countless love stories had begun on its weathered wooden docks. Cedar Falls itself was the kind of place that seemed frozen in time, where neighbors still left their doors unlocked, and children could ride their bicycles safely through tree-lined streets until well after dark. The town had been established in 1887 by loggers and miners, but by the 1950s it had transformed into a peaceful retreat for families seeking the simple pleasures of mountain life. With a population hovering just under 3,000, everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least they thought they did. The lake that gave the town its character was fed by underground springs that kept its waters unusually clear and clean year-round. Local geologists had long been fascinated by the lake's unique formation, created by ancient glacial activity that had carved out a basin of remarkable depth and complexity. What most residents didn't know was that beneath its placid surface lay a network of underwater caves and chambers that had never been fully explored or mapped. But on this particular September morning, exactly 10 years ago, Lake Serenity would become the center of a mystery that would haunt the town for a decade, ultimately revealing secrets that would challenge everything the community thought they knew about one of their most beloved residents. Thomas Mitchell was 62 years old when he disappeared. He was the kind of man who seemed to be carved from the very mountains that surrounded their valley, sturdy, dependable, and as much a part of the landscape as the towering pines that lined the lake's edge. Standing 6 feet tall with weathered hands that told the story of decades spent working outdoors, Thomas had the kind of presence that made people feel safe and understood. He had moved to Cedar Falls 35 years earlier with Martha, both of them young newlyweds seeking a fresh start after Thomas completed his service in Vietnam. The young couple had purchased their lakeside cabin for a modest sum from an elderly widow who had taken a liking to Martha's gentle nature and Thomas's respectful demeanor. Over the years, Thomas had worked various jobs, as a part-time ranger for the Forest Service, a handyman for the town's elderly residents, and occasionally as a fishing guide for tourists who discovered Cedar Falls' hidden beauty. But it was Thomas's role as an unofficial community counselor that had truly defined his place in the town's social fabric. People naturally gravitated toward him with their problems and concerns. Whether it was a troubled teenager acting out at school, a young couple struggling with financial difficulties, or an elderly resident facing health challenges, Thomas had a way of listening without judgment and offering practical, compassionate advice. Every morning, without fail, Thomas would make his way down to the dock behind his modest cabin, carrying his well-worn fishing rod and a thermos of coffee that his wife Martha had prepared before dawn. The ritual had become so ingrained in the community's rhythm that even the local wildlife seemed to anticipate his arrival. A family of loons had made their home near his fishing spot, and they would often glide silently nearby as he cast his line into the depths. The neighbors often joked that you could set your watch by Thomas's routine. 5:30 in the morning, he'd be walking down that gravel path, his footsteps crunching softly in the pre-dawn quiet. By 6, his small aluminum boat would be cutting through the water, heading toward his favorite fishing spot near the old sunken tree on the lake's eastern shore. Martha Mitchell had been married to Thomas for 38 years. She knew her husband's patterns better than anyone, which is why she began to worry when the sun climbed high into the afternoon sky, and there was still no sign of his return. Thomas never stayed out past noon on weekdays. He had too much respect for Martha's carefully planned lunch schedule, and besides, they had developed a tradition of spending their afternoons together, whether working in Martha's beloved vegetable garden or simply sitting on their porch swing, watching the lake's ever-changing moods. Martha was a retired elementary school teacher who had spent 25 years nurturing the children of Cedar Falls. She was known throughout the community for her patience, her homemade cookies that appeared at every school function, and her uncanny ability to remember the names and birthdays of every student she had ever taught. Friends often remarked that Martha and Thomas were perfectly matched, she with her gentle warmth and endless capacity for nurturing, he with his quiet strength and wisdom that seemed to run as deep as the lake itself. Their marriage had been built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and an unspoken understanding that some of life's deepest joys came from simple pleasures shared together. They had wanted children of their own, and Martha had suffered through 3 miscarriages in their early years together. Eventually, They had made peace with their childless state, channeling their parental instincts into caring for the entire community. Martha mothered her students with fierce protectiveness, while Thomas became the father figure that many young men in town sought out for guidance and support. By 2 o'clock on that September day, Martha's concern had transformed into genuine fear. She called their neighbor, Bill Henderson, who lived in the cabin next door. Bill was also a fisherman and had known Thomas since they were boys playing along these same shores. The two men had served in Vietnam together, though in different units, and had reconnected when they both settled in Cedar Falls. Their friendship had been forged in shared understanding of experiences they rarely discussed but never forgot. Without hesitation, Bill grabbed his binoculars and headed out in his own boat to search for his lifelong friend. What Bill found would be the first piece of a puzzle that wouldn't be solved for 10 long years. Thomas's boat was floating empty near the center of the lake, its engine still running at idle speed. The fishing rod was still mounted in its holder, the line disappearing into the dark water below. Thomas's coffee thermos sat open on the bench seat, steam still rising from the black liquid inside. His jacket hung neatly on a hook, and his tackle box remained organized and undisturbed. It was as if Thomas had simply vanished into thin air. Bill immediately radioed the sheriff's department, and within an hour, Lake Serenity was swarming with rescue boats, divers, and emergency personnel. The search continued for 3 weeks, with volunteers coming from neighboring towns to help comb every inch of the lake's shoreline and depths. The search effort became one of the largest volunteer mobilizations in the region's history. Hundreds of people contributed their time, resources, and expertise to finding Thomas Mitchell. Local businesses donated food and supplies for the search teams. The volunteer fire departments from 5 surrounding towns sent boats and personnel. Even strangers who had only heard about the missing fishermen through news reports drove hours to join the search efforts. Professional divers from the state police brought sophisticated sonar equipment that mapped the lake's bottom in unprecedented detail. They discovered that Lake Serenity was far more complex than anyone had realized, with underwater ridges, drop-offs, and what appeared to be cave systems that had never been explored. The diving teams worked in shifts around the clock, methodically searching every area where a person might have ended up. Martha refused to leave the lakeside during those 3 weeks. She set up a small camp chair on her dock and maintained a constant vigil, greeting every search team with hot coffee and sandwiches. The sight of the dignified woman keeping her lonely watch became a symbol of hope and determination for the entire community. Local teenagers took turns sitting with her so she wouldn't be alone, and the town's pastor organized prayer circles that met on the shore each evening at sunset. The mystery deepened as investigators pieced together the evidence from Thomas's abandoned boat. Everything suggested that he had simply vanished mid-activity. His coffee was still warm when Bill found the boat, indicating that whatever had happened had occurred recently. The fishing line was taut in the water, suggesting that Thomas might have had a fish on the line when he disappeared. Most puzzling of all, there were no signs of struggle, no damage to the boat, and no indication that anything had gone wrong. Dr. Patricia Valdez, the regional medical examiner, worked closely with the sheriff's department to analyze every possibility. They considered medical emergencies, accidental drowning, and even the remote possibility of foul play, though Thomas had no known enemies and was universally beloved in the community. The investigation revealed that Thomas had been in excellent health according to his recent physical examination, making a sudden medical emergency unlikely, though not impossible. The search teams also discovered several items of interest on the lake bottom that were unrelated to Thomas's disappearance but painted a picture of the lake's history. They found remnants of old logging equipment from the town's early days, pieces of boats that had been lost in storms over the decades, and various personal items that had been accidentally dropped or lost over the years. Each discovery raised hopes that they might finally find some clue about Thomas, but none provided answers to the central mystery. They found nothing, no body, no signs of struggle, no indication of what might have happened to one of Cedar Falls' most beloved residents. The official investigation concluded that Thomas had likely suffered some kind of medical emergency and fallen into the lake, but without a body, there could be no definitive answers. The mystery of Thomas Mitchell's disappearance became the town's great unsolved case. Some people whispered about the old Native American legends surrounding the lake, stories of spirits that could pull unwary souls into the depths. Others speculated about more practical explanations, a heart attack, a slip and fall, or perhaps even something more sinister. Martha Mitchell never stopped believing that her husband would return. Every morning for the first year after his disappearance, she would walk down to the dock and stare out at the water, as if willing Thomas to emerge from the mist in his little aluminum boat. Friends and family gently encouraged her to move away, to start fresh somewhere without the constant reminder of her loss. But Martha refused to leave. "He'll come home," she would say with quiet determination. "Thomas always comes home." As the years passed, the intensity of the mystery began to fade from the community's daily consciousness, though it never truly disappeared. New families moved to Cedar Falls, drawn by the natural beauty and peaceful atmosphere of the lake community. Children who had been toddlers when Thomas vanished grew into teenagers who knew his story only as local legend. The disappearance had affected different people in different ways. Some residents became more cautious about lake activities, insisting on buddy systems and safety protocols that hadn't seemed necessary before. Others found themselves looking for Thomas in every distant figure they spotted on the water, their hearts racing with false hope before reality set in. Bill Henderson, Thomas's best friend and neighbor, struggled particularly hard with survivor's guilt. He second-guessed every decision from that day, wondering if he could have done something differently, if he could have prevented whatever tragedy had befallen his lifelong friend. Bill began keeping even more careful watch over Martha, checking on her daily and helping with maintenance around her property. The two of them formed an unspoken bond of shared loss and mutual support. The local coffee shop, Murphy's Corner Cafe, became an unofficial memorial to Thomas. His favorite corner table remained empty for months after his disappearance, with regular customers instinctively avoiding it out of respect. Eventually, life's practicalities necessitated using the table again, but Murphy's owner, an elderly Irish immigrant named Sean Murphy, placed a small brass plaque on the table that read, "In memory of good conversations and a good man." The annual Cedar Falls Summer Festival took on new meaning in the years following Thomas's disappearance. What had once been a purely celebratory event became also a way for the community to honor his memory and support Martha. A scholarship fund was established in Thomas's name for local students pursuing careers in conservation or community service, reflecting the values he had embodied during his life in Cedar Falls. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the town's only physician, noticed an increase in anxiety-related visits in the months following Thomas's disappearance. The unexplained nature of his vanishing had shaken many residents' sense of security and predictability. She worked with the local pastor, Reverend Michael Thompson, to provide counseling services and support groups for people struggling to process the community's loss. The mystery also attracted unwanted attention from outside the community. Amateur investigators, psychics claiming to have visions, and conspiracy theorists occasionally descended on Cedar Falls, drawn by the unexplained nature of Thomas's disappearance. The town learned to politely but firmly discourage such visitors, protecting both Martha's privacy and their own sense of peace. Local children created their own folklore around the mystery. Some claimed to see Thomas's ghost walking along the shoreline at dawn, while others insisted they had spotted his boat in the mist on particularly foggy mornings. These stories, while sometimes unsettling to adults, seemed to help the children process the incomprehensible loss of a man who had been a kind and constant presence in their young lives. The lake continued its eternal rhythms. Seasons changed, bringing the spectacular colors of autumn, the pristine whites of winter, the vibrant greens of spring, and the lazy warmth of summer. Fishermen still cast their lines into the same waters where Thomas had spent countless mornings pursuing the perfect catch. Life, as it always does, moved forward, but some mysteries have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. Dr. Sarah Chen had moved to Cedar Falls 3 years ago, seeking a quieter life after a demanding career as a marine biologist in Seattle. She had purchased a small cabin on the lake's western shore and quickly became involved in local conservation efforts. Sarah had heard the story of Thomas Mitchell, of course. It was impossible to live in Cedar Falls for more than a week without someone mentioning the town's greatest mystery. Sarah's decision to relocate to Cedar Falls hadn't been made lightly. After 15 years studying marine ecosystems in some of the world's most polluted waters, she had reached a point of emotional and professional burnout. The constant battle against environmental degradation, combined with the loss of her research partner and mentor in a diving accident, had left her questioning her purpose and seeking a place where she could apply her knowledge to preservation rather than damage control. Cedar Falls offered everything Sarah had been searching for: pristine natural beauty, a community that valued environmental stewardship, and waters that reminded her why she had fallen in love with aquatic biology in the first place. The town welcomed her expertise enthusiastically, and she quickly found herself serving on the environmental committee and advising local businesses on sustainable practices. As someone who had spent her career studying aquatic ecosystems, Sarah was fascinated by Lake Serenity's unique characteristics. The lake was unusually deep for its size, with some areas plunging down over 200 feet. Underground springs fed the lake, creating areas of varying temperature and mineral content that supported an incredibly diverse range of plant and aquatic life. Sarah's initial surveys of the lake revealed an ecosystem that was remarkably healthy compared to most bodies of water she had studied. The water quality was exceptional, the fish populations were robust and diverse, and the aquatic plant life showed no signs of the stress typically associated with human development around shorelines. However, her sonar readings also revealed the presence of significant amounts of debris in the deeper areas, a common problem even in pristine environments. The idea for a comprehensive cleanup had been percolating in Sarah's mind for months before she proposed it to the town council. She had conducted similar projects during her time in Seattle, though those had been focused on removing pollution rather than general debris. In Cedar Falls, the cleanup would serve multiple purposes: improving the already excellent ecosystem, providing valuable scientific data about the lake's deeper regions, and potentially discovering historical artifacts that could shed light on the area's past. When Sarah presented her proposal to the town council, she emphasized the educational opportunities the project could provide. Local high school students could participate in the data collection and analysis, gaining hands-on experience with scientific methodology and environmental stewardship. The project could also serve as a model for other communities facing similar challenges with underwater debris accumulation. It was Sarah's idea to organize a comprehensive cleanup of the lake's deeper areas. Over the years, debris had accumulated in the depths: old fishing equipment, discarded appliances, and various items that had either been dumped illegally or lost accidentally. The cleanup would not only improve the lake's ecosystem, but also provide valuable data about the underwater environment. The town council enthusiastically supported the project, providing funding for professional diving equipment and expertise. Sarah coordinated with a team of certified divers from the regional university, including her former colleague Dr. Marcus Webb, who specialized in underwater archaeology. The cleanup was scheduled for early October, when the autumn weather would provide ideal diving conditions and the reduced summer boat traffic would make the operation safer. Martha Mitchell, now 72 years old, watched the preparations with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Part of her wondered if the divers might finally find some trace of Thomas, some answer to the question that had haunted her for a decade. Another part of her feared what they might discover. The diving operation began on a crisp Monday morning. The lake's surface was calm, reflecting the brilliant reds and golds of the surrounding maple and oak trees. 3 boats anchored at different points around the lake, each equipped with diving platforms and recovery equipment. Dr. Webb and his team worked systematically, dividing the lake into grid sections and carefully documenting everything they found. The first day yielded the expected collection of lost fishing tackle, a few old tires, and several pieces of rusted metal that appeared to be remnants of a dock that had broken away during a storm decades earlier. It was on the second day that they made the discovery that would change everything. The team was working in the lake's deepest section, an area known locally as the Devil's Hole due to its seemingly bottomless depth. The underwater visibility was excellent, and the divers had been making steady progress clearing debris from a ledge about 60 feet down. Dr. Webb was methodically documenting each item they recovered when he noticed something that didn't fit the pattern of typical lake debris. Most of what they had found so far consisted of items that had clearly been lost accidentally: fishing equipment that had broken free from lines, tools that had fallen from boats, and various household items that had likely been blown into the water during storms. But this object was different. It was positioned deliberately, carefully placed, rather than randomly deposited by wind or current. Dr. Webb was the one who first spotted it, a glint of metal partially buried in the sediment at the base of a large boulder. As he carefully approached and began to clear away the accumulated silt and organic matter, the object's shape became more distinct. It was a metal box, roughly the size of a briefcase, made of what appeared to be stainless steel or aluminum. Despite being underwater for what must have been years, the box showed remarkably little corrosion. More intriguingly, It seemed to be deliberately weighted down with heavy stones that had been carefully arranged around it. The stones themselves were interesting. They weren't native to the lake bottom, but appeared to have been selected specifically for their weight and size. Someone had taken considerable care to ensure that this box would remain exactly where they had placed it, undisturbed by currents or seasonal changes in the lake's water levels. Dr. Webb signaled to his diving partner, Jessica Morrison, a graduate student who had been documenting their finds with underwater photography equipment. Together, they worked to free the box from its resting place. The weight of the stones and the box itself required both divers to lift it, and they had to make several trips to the surface to bring up all the components they had found. As they worked, other members of the diving team gathered around their discovery site. The deliberate nature of the placement was obvious to everyone involved. This wasn't something that had been lost or discarded accidentally. Someone had gone to considerable effort to ensure this box would remain hidden in the depths of Lake Serenity. When the box finally reached the surface, the entire diving team gathered around to examine their discovery. The excitement was palpable, but it was tempered by a sense of reverence for what might be a very personal or sensitive find. The box was indeed made of marine-grade stainless steel, designed to withstand extended underwater exposure. It had a simple but robust locking mechanism, and despite the years underwater, the seal appeared to be intact. The craftsmanship was excellent. This wasn't a makeshift container, but a professional quality piece of equipment designed specifically for underwater storage. Most remarkably, there was an engraved nameplate on the top of the box, tarnished but still clearly legible. T. Mitchell. Private. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small community of Cedar Falls. Word spread quickly, and by late afternoon, a crowd had gathered at the dock where the diving operation was based. Sheriff David Ramirez, who had been a deputy during the original investigation into Thomas's disappearance, took custody of the box and announced that it would be opened officially the following day in the presence of Martha Mitchell and other relevant parties. That evening, the town buzzed with speculation. What could Thomas have hidden in the depths of Lake Serenity? Why would he have weighted down a box and placed it in such a remote location? And most importantly, what did this discovery mean for the mystery of his disappearance? Martha Mitchell spent a sleepless night, her mind racing with possibilities. Thomas had never mentioned having a waterproof box, and she couldn't imagine what he might have wanted to hide underwater. They had shared everything during their decades of marriage, or so she had always believed. The next morning, a small group gathered in the Cedar Falls Community Center for the opening of Thomas Mitchell's box. Martha was there, of course, along with Sheriff Ramirez, Dr. Chen, Dr. Webb, and Mayor Patricia Hoffman. The town's lawyer, James Morrison, was also present to ensure that proper legal procedures were followed. Sheriff Ramirez carefully photographed the box from every angle before attempting to open it. The lock mechanism, despite its years underwater, still functioned smoothly. As the lid lifted, a collective intake of breath filled the room. Inside the box, wrapped in multiple layers of waterproof plastic, were dozens of photographs, several notebooks, and what appeared to be legal documents. But it was the photographs that immediately captured everyone's attention. They were pictures of children. Dozens of different children of various ages, from toddlers to teenagers. The photos appeared to span several decades, based on the changing styles of clothing and the evolution of the photographic quality. Some were formal school portraits. Others were candid shots taken at playgrounds, birthday parties, and family gatherings. Martha's hands trembled as she reached for one of the notebooks. The handwriting inside was unmistakably Thomas's, filled with dates, names, and detailed observations about each child photographed. As she read, tears began to stream down her face, but they weren't tears of sorrow or confusion. They were tears of understanding and overwhelming love. The first entry in the notebook was dated 35 years earlier. Sarah Beth Morrison, born March 15th, adopted by the Morrison family, healthy, beautiful, loved. I was blessed to know her, however briefly. As Martha continued reading, the full scope of Thomas's secret began to emerge. For over 3 decades, Thomas Mitchell had been quietly documenting the lives of children he had helped bring into the world, not as a doctor or nurse, but as an intermediary in private adoptions. Inside the box, wrapped in multiple layers of waterproof plastic, were dozens of photographs, several notebooks, and what appeared to be legal documents. But it was the photographs that immediately captured everyone's attention. They were pictures of children, dozens of different children of various ages, from toddlers to teenagers. The photos appeared to span several decades, based on the changing styles of clothing and the evolution of the photographic quality. Some were formal school portraits, others were candid shots taken at playgrounds, birthday parties, and family gatherings. Martha's hands trembled as she reached for one of the notebooks. The handwriting inside was unmistakably Thomas's, filled with dates, names, and detailed observations about each child photographed. As she read, tears began to stream down her face, but they weren't tears of sorrow or confusion. They were tears of understanding and overwhelming love. The first entry in the notebook was dated 35 years earlier. Sarah Beth Morrison, born March 15th, adopted by the Morrison family. Healthy, beautiful, loved. I was blessed to know her, however briefly. As Martha continued reading, the full scope of Thomas's secret began to emerge. For over 3 decades, Thomas Mitchell had been quietly documenting the lives of children he had helped bring into the world, not as a doctor or nurse, but as an intermediary in private adoptions. The notebooks revealed intricate details about each case Thomas had handled. He had worked with unwed mothers, many of them teenagers who had found themselves pregnant in an era when such circumstances carried tremendous social stigma. Thomas had somehow developed a network of contacts that spanned several states, connecting these young women with families who desperately wanted children but couldn't conceive. One particularly detailed entry described the case of Maria Santos, a 17-year-old girl from a strict Catholic family who had become pregnant and been disowned by her parents. Thomas had arranged for her to stay with a sympathetic family in a neighboring town during her pregnancy, provided emotional support throughout the process, and helped her connect with a couple in Oregon who had been trying to have children for 8 years. The entry included updates spanning 15 years, documenting the child's academic achievements, sports accomplishments, and eventual acceptance to medical school. Another entry told the story of Jennifer Walsh, a young woman who had been the victim of assault and found herself pregnant as a result. Thomas had not only helped arrange the adoption, but had also connected Jennifer with counseling services and legal assistance. His notes showed that he had maintained contact with Jennifer for years afterward, documenting her recovery, her eventual marriage to a kind man who knew her history, and her successful career as a social worker helping other trauma survivors. The level of detail in Thomas's records was extraordinary. He had documented not just the basic facts of each adoption, but the personalities, interests, and dreams of both the birth mothers and the adoptive families. He had clearly invested tremendous time and emotional energy in ensuring that each match was carefully considered and appropriate. In an era before modern adoption agencies were readily available in rural areas like Cedar Falls, Thomas had filled a crucial role, helping to create families while protecting the privacy and dignity of birth mothers who often faced social stigma. Each entry told a story of hope and love. Thomas had kept meticulous records not for any legal or financial purpose, but out of genuine care for the children whose lives he had touched. He documented their achievements, their milestones, their happiness in their adoptive families. Many of the later photographs showed these children as adults with families of their own. One particularly moving section of the notebooks focused on siblings who had been separated due to circumstances, but whom Thomas had managed to place with families in the same geographic area, allowing them to maintain contact as they grew up. The care and forethought he had put into preserving these family connections demonstrated a deep understanding of the psychological importance of sibling relationships. Among the documents were letters, dozens of them, from grateful adoptive parents and even some from birth mothers who wanted Thomas to know how thankful they were for his help during their most difficult times. The letters painted a picture of a man who had provided not just practical assistance, but emotional support and genuine compassion to families in crisis. One letter, dated just 5 years earlier, was particularly moving. It was from a woman named Rebecca, who had given birth as a teenager and, with Thomas's help, had placed her daughter with a loving family. The letter explained that she had since married, had other children, and had always wondered about the daughter she had placed for adoption. Through Thomas, she had been able to learn that her daughter was thriving, had graduated from college, and was pursuing a career in teaching. Mr. Mitchell, the letter read, "You gave me the greatest gift anyone could give, the knowledge that the hardest decision of my life was the right one. My daughter is loved, successful, and happy. I will never be able to thank you enough for helping me give her the life she deserved. Because of your kindness and wisdom during the darkest period of my life, 2 families were blessed. Mine, which was allowed to heal and grow, and hers, which was completed by her presence. "You are truly an angel on earth." Another letter came from Dr. and Mrs. Robert Hansen, who had adopted 3 children through Thomas's assistance over a span of 8 years. "Thomas," the letter began, "we cannot adequately express our gratitude for the 3 miracles you brought into our lives. David, now 16, is captain of his high school debate team and dreams of becoming a lawyer. Sophie, 14, is a gifted artist, whose paintings have been displayed in the county fair. And little Michael, just 8, has your same gentle spirit and love for the outdoors. Our family is complete because of your compassion and dedication." The letters revealed that Thomas had maintained relationships with many of the families long after the formal adoption processes were complete. He had attended graduations, weddings, and birthday parties when invited. He had provided ongoing counseling and support to both adoptive families and birth mothers, who continued to struggle with their decisions. Several birth mothers had written to thank Thomas for helping them understand that choosing adoption was an act of love, not abandonment. One woman described how Thomas had spent hours with her, helping her work through her fears and guilt, ultimately giving her the strength to make a decision she knew was best for her child, even though it broke her heart. The documents also revealed the practical challenges Thomas had faced in facilitating these adoptions. In the 1980s and 1990s, adoption laws and procedures were more informal than they would later become, but they still required careful navigation of legal requirements across state lines. Thomas had apparently educated himself extensively on adoption law and had worked with attorneys in multiple states to ensure that all procedures were handled properly and legally. As the full picture of Thomas's secret work became clear, Martha understood why her husband had hidden this part of his life so carefully. In their small, close-knit community, such activities could have led to judgment, gossip, and potential legal complications. Thomas had been protecting not just himself but all the families he had helped. But why had he hidden the box in the lake? And what had happened to him that morning 10 years ago? The answer came in the final notebook entry, dated just 1 week before Thomas's disappearance. "I'm getting older, and Martha has been asking questions about my weekly trips to Billings. I can't bear to lie to her anymore, but I also can't risk exposing the families I've helped. I've decided to place these records somewhere safe, where only I can access them, but where they'll be preserved in case something happens to me. The lake has always been my sanctuary, my place of peace and reflection. It seems fitting that it should guard these memories of the joy I've been privileged to witness and facilitate." The entry continued, "If anyone ever finds this box, please know that every child represented here was wanted, loved, and given the best possible chance at happiness. This work has been the most meaningful part of my life, aside from my marriage to Martha. I only pray that she'll understand why I kept this secret." Dr. Webb's voice broke the silence that had fallen over the room. "There's something else," he said quietly. "When we found the box, it wasn't the only thing down there. We discovered what appears to be a small underwater cave system. It's possible that Thomas was exploring this area when he disappeared." The revelation added another layer to the mystery. Had Thomas been checking on his hidden box when tragedy struck? Had he discovered something in the underwater caves that led to an accident? Sheriff Ramirez organized another diving expedition to explore the cave system more thoroughly. What they found provided the final piece of the puzzle, but also opened new questions about the extent of Thomas's secret activities. The cave system was more extensive than anyone had initially realized. A narrow entrance, barely visible from above, led to a series of interconnected chambers that extended deep into the lake's bedrock. The caves were partially flooded, with air pockets that would have allowed someone to surface and breathe. But the passages were treacherous and would have required considerable skill and experience to navigate safely. Deep within the cave system, wedged between 2 large rocks in what appeared to be the deepest accessible chamber, were Thomas's remains, along with his diving gear. It became clear that Thomas had been secretly scuba diving for years, using equipment he had purchased and stored in a small shed behind his cabin, a shed that Martha had never had reason to enter. The diving equipment was sophisticated and well-maintained, suggesting that Thomas had been an experienced diver, despite having no known certification or training through local facilities. Further investigation revealed that he had taken diving courses during his regular trips to Billings, the nearest major city, under an assumed name. He had apparently been exploring the lake's underwater features for years, possibly decades, keeping this passion as secret as his adoption work. The medical examiner's investigation revealed several important details about Thomas's final moments. The evidence suggested that Thomas had been diving to check on his hidden box when he became trapped in the cave system. His air supply had run out before he could free himself from the rocky crevice where his body was found. Importantly, there were no signs of panic or desperate struggle. Thomas's remains were positioned in a way that suggested he had remained calm and methodical, even as his air supply dwindled. Dr. Valdez found evidence that Thomas had attempted to wedge his diving knife into the rock crevice to create leverage for escape, but the knife had broken under the pressure. Even in his final moments, Thomas had been problem-solving, trying to find a way back to Martha and the life they had built together. The discovery of Thomas's remains brought a mixture of relief and renewed grief to the community. For Martha, learning the truth about her husband's fate was both heartbreaking and somehow comforting. The uncertainty that had plagued her for 10 years was finally resolved, even though the resolution brought its own pain. The medical examiner determined that Thomas had passed away peacefully, likely from oxygen deprivation. There were no signs of struggle or distress in his final position, suggesting that he had remained calm even in his final moments, perhaps thinking of the families he had helped and the love he had shared with Martha. This detail provided some comfort to those who had known and loved him, but the discovery also raised new questions about the scope of Thomas's secret life. If he had been diving for years without anyone's knowledge, what else might he have been doing that the community hadn't known about? The caves where his body was found contained evidence of multiple visits, dive weights, backup air tanks, and even a small waterproof container with emergency supplies. The discovery of Thomas's secret work sent ripples throughout the community and beyond. Many of the children mentioned in his notebooks were now adults living in various parts of the country. When word spread about what had been found, several of them traveled to Cedar Falls to pay their respects to the man who had quietly changed their lives. Among them was Dr. Sarah Morrison, the same Sarah Beth mentioned in the first notebook entry, and daughter of the town lawyer James Morrison. She had grown up in Cedar Falls, never knowing that the kind fisherman who sometimes waved to her from his boat was the person responsible for bringing her to the family that loved her so much. Sarah had become a pediatric surgeon, driven by what she had always described as an inexplicable desire to help children in crisis. Learning about Thomas's role in her life suddenly made her life's purpose feel like destiny rather than coincidence. She spent an entire afternoon with Martha, sharing stories about her childhood, her education, and her career, expressing gratitude for a gift she had never known she had received. Another visitor was Marcus Chen, now a successful architect in Portland, who had been placed with his adoptive family through Thomas's network when he was just 6 months old. Marcus brought his own 2 children to meet Martha, introducing them to the woman whose husband had made their family possible. "My parents always told me I was chosen," Marcus explained to Martha, "but I never understood how literally true that was until now. Mr. Mitchell didn't just facilitate an adoption. He created the foundation for generations of love and happiness." Perhaps the most emotional reunion was with the Rodriguez family from Phoenix. Thomas had helped place 3 siblings, Maria, Carlos, and little Elena, with the Rodriguez family after their birth mother had passed away in a car accident, and no relatives could be found to care for them. The children, now adults in their 30s, had maintained close relationships with each other and credited their adoptive parents with giving them stability and love during an impossibly difficult time. Maria, now a social worker herself, had unknowingly followed a career path similar to Thomas's calling. "I always felt driven to help families in crisis," she explained during her visit to Cedar Falls. "Now I understand where that passion came from. Mr. Mitchell showed me even as a baby what it means to care for others selflessly." The reunion between these now adult children and the documentation of their early lives became a celebration of love, family, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Many of them shared stories of happy childhoods, successful careers, and loving families of their own, testament to the wisdom and care that Thomas had shown in matching children with the right families. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the young woman who had been assaulted and had placed her child for adoption through Thomas's help, traveled from her home in California, where she now ran a nonprofit organization supporting other survivors of violence. She brought with her a letter from her daughter, now 28 and a teacher who had grown up knowing she was adopted and had always been curious about her birth mother. "Mr. Mitchell helped me understand that giving life to my daughter didn't diminish because of how she was conceived," Jennifer explained to Martha through tears. "He helped me see that she was pure love, and that placing her with parents who could give her everything I couldn't was an act of courage. not cowardice. He probably saved my life by helping me find purpose in what felt like the worst thing that had ever happened to me. The gathering in Cedar Falls became an informal support group for people whose lives had been touched by Thomas's work. They shared not just their gratitude, but also their struggles with identity, belonging, and the complex emotions that often accompany adoption. Many discovered that their experiences were remarkably similar, despite their different backgrounds and circumstances. Rebecca, the woman who had written the moving letter to Thomas, finally met her daughter's adoptive parents and, with their blessing, was able to establish a relationship with the daughter she had placed for adoption 23 years earlier. The reunion, facilitated by Thomas's careful record-keeping even in death, brought healing to wounds that had never fully closed. The adoptive families who traveled to Cedar Falls were equally moved by the experience. Many had wondered about the mysterious Mr. Mitchell, who had brought such joy to their lives but had always maintained a respectful distance after the adoptions were finalized. Learning about the depth of his caring and the extent of his documentation revealed that their instincts about his character had been correct. Dr. and Mrs. Hanson, who had adopted 3 children through Thomas's network, brought all 3 of their now adult children to Cedar Falls. The family had always known their adoption story, but seeing Thomas's detailed notes about their placement revealed the extraordinary care that had gone into matching them with the right parents. He wrote about our hopes for large family, our experience with infertility, and our desire to adopt siblings who could grow up together, Mrs. Hanson explained. He knew us better than we knew ourselves, and he found children who needed exactly what we had to offer. It wasn't coincidence. It was careful, thoughtful planning motivated by genuine love. Martha Mitchell, initially overwhelmed by the revelation of her husband's secret life, came to understand that this discovery was actually a gift. For 10 years, she had wondered why Thomas had been taken from her so suddenly. Now she knew that his final act had been one of love and protection, both for the families he had helped and for her. The town of Cedar Falls decided to honor Thomas's memory by establishing the Thomas Mitchell Family Foundation, dedicated to supporting adoption services and family counseling in rural communities. Martha became the foundation's first chairperson, using her husband's detailed records and methodology to help continue his work in a more open and official capacity. The foundation's first initiative was to create a comprehensive resource center for families considering adoption. Using Thomas's notebooks as a guide, they developed screening processes, counseling protocols, and support systems that reflected his compassionate approach while meeting modern legal and ethical standards. The center became a model for similar programs in rural areas across the Mountain West. Martha worked tirelessly to establish partnerships with state agencies, legal professionals, and healthcare providers to create a network that could provide the same kind of comprehensive support that Thomas had offered informally for decades. The foundation also provided scholarships for social work students and funding for mental health services in underserved communities. Dr. Sarah Chen's Lake Cleanup Project, which had begun as a simple environmental initiative, evolved into an annual event that combined conservation with community celebration. Each year on the anniversary of the discovery, Cedar Falls residents gathered at Lake Serenity to clean the waters and share stories of Thomas Mitchell's legacy. The annual Serenity Day celebration became a festival of family and community. Adoptive families from across the region attended, sharing their stories and connecting with others who had similar experiences. Birth mothers who had worked with Thomas were invited to participate if they felt comfortable doing so, often finding unexpected healing in connecting with the broader community of people whose lives had been touched by his work. Local high school students began participating in Serenity Day as part of a community service requirement, but many continued volunteering long after graduation. They learned about the complexity of family formation, the courage required to make difficult decisions, and the ripple effects of individual acts of compassion. The celebration also included educational components about adoption, foster care, and family support services. Mental health professionals provided workshops on topics like attachment, identity formation, and healthy family communication. These sessions served both the adoptive community and the broader public, helping to reduce stigma and increase understanding about non-traditional family structures. Martha's personal transformation in the years following the discovery was remarkable to witness. The woman who had spent a decade wondering about her husband's fate became a passionate advocate for the families Thomas had served. She used her background in education to develop materials that helped children understand adoption in age-appropriate ways, and she became a sought-after speaker at conferences on rural adoption services. She also began reaching out to some of the families mentioned in the notebooks, forming new friendships and connections that brought unexpected joy to her later years. Many of the adoptive parents had never had the chance to properly thank Thomas during his lifetime, and they welcomed the opportunity to share their gratitude with Martha. The lake itself seemed somehow more peaceful after Thomas's story was revealed. The mystery that had hung over its waters for a decade had been replaced by a sense of wonder and gratitude. Families continued to fish from its shores, children learned to swim in its clear waters, and young couples still began their love stories on its weathered docks. But now these activities carried additional meaning. Local fishing guides began including Thomas's story as part of their tours, not as a tale of mystery and loss, but as an example of how individual actions can create lasting positive change. Children who fished with their grandparents learned about the importance of helping others and the value of quiet service to community. The underwater cave system where Thomas's remains were found was carefully sealed to prevent future accidents, but a small memorial plaque was placed on a boulder near the shore. The inscription read, "Thomas Mitchell, devoted husband, skilled fisherman, and guardian of families. His greatest catch was the love he helped create." But the memorial that would have meant the most to Thomas wasn't made of bronze or stone. It was the network of thriving families that continued to grow and evolve. Second and third generations of children whose family stories began with Thomas's intervention were now being born, creating an ever-expanding circle of love and connection. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's nonprofit organization in California began using principles adapted from Thomas's approach to help other survivors of trauma make decisions about unplanned pregnancies. Her work demonstrated how Thomas's compassionate methodology could be applied to help people in various crisis situations, not just adoption placement. The foundation established by Cedar Falls also began offering educational programs for professionals working in rural adoption services. Social workers, attorneys, and healthcare providers came from across the region to learn about Thomas's approach, which emphasized relationship building, long-term support, and deep respect for the autonomy and dignity of all parties involved. Martha's relationship with Rebecca, the woman who had placed her daughter for adoption through Thomas's help, became particularly meaningful. The two women, both shaped by loss and resilience, found comfort in sharing their experiences and supporting each other through the complex emotions surrounding Thomas's legacy. Rebecca's daughter, now aware of her adoption story and her birth mother's identity, chose to pursue a career in counseling with a focus on helping young mothers make informed decisions about unplanned pregnancies. Her work brought another generation into the circle of people carrying forward Thomas's mission of supporting families in crisis. The financial aspects of Thomas's work also came to light through the discovery of the box. Despite facilitating dozens of adoptions over 3 decades, Thomas had never accepted payment for his services. In fact, his personal records showed that he had often used his own money to help cover medical expenses, legal fees, and living costs for birth mothers who needed support during their pregnancies. The Family Foundation worked to identify birth mothers who had worked with Thomas and were now facing financial hardships in their later years. Several had become single mothers, were dealing with health issues, or were struggling economically. The foundation provided discreet financial assistance and support services, honoring Thomas's commitment to caring for these women long after their initial crisis had passed. As Autumn returned to Cedar Falls 5 years after the discovery, the town had been fundamentally changed by learning the truth about Thomas Mitchell. What had begun as a story of mysterious disappearance had evolved into a celebration of the quiet heroism that exists in ordinary communities. The annual Serenity Day had grown into one of the region's most anticipated events, drawing hundreds of visitors who came not just for the environmental activities, but for the opportunity to hear stories of hope and resilience. Local hotels and restaurants reported that many families made the celebration an annual tradition, returning year after year to be part of a community that celebrated love in all its forms. Martha continued to live in the cabin by the lake, but her morning routine had evolved into something beautiful and purposeful. Instead of staring out at the water with longing and questions, she would sit on her dock with a cup of coffee and respond to letters from families around the country who had learned about Thomas's work and were seeking advice or support. She had become an unofficial grandmother to dozens of children whose family stories included Thomas's intervention. Birthday cards, graduation announcements, and wedding invitations arrived regularly at her mailbox, creating a constant reminder of the ongoing impact of her husband's compassionate work. The high school in Cedar Falls established the Thomas Mitchell Service Learning Program, which required students to complete community service projects related to family support, environmental conservation, or community building. Many students chose projects that directly supported the Family Foundation's work, learning valuable lessons about empathy, service, and social responsibility. Local college students studying social work, psychology, and related fields often completed internships with the foundation, gaining hands-on experience while contributing to the organization's mission. The program became so respected that universities across the region began encouraging their students to apply for these competitive positions. Dr. Sarah Chen, whose environmental cleanup had sparked the discovery that changed everything, continued her research on Lake Serenity's unique ecosystem. Her work revealed that the underground springs that fed the lake created microenvironments that supported several species of aquatic life found nowhere else in the region. The lake's designation as a protected habitat ensured that future generations would be able to enjoy its pristine beauty. Sarah also collaborated with the Family Foundation to develop educational programs that used the lake's ecosystem as a metaphor for healthy family and community relationships. School groups visited the lake to learn about environmental stewardship and social responsibility, understanding how individual actions can have far-reaching positive effects on entire systems. The story of Thomas Mitchell's discovery had been featured in magazines and documentaries, bringing national attention to Cedar Falls and inspiring similar initiatives in communities across the country. Rural adoption organizations began adopting elements of Thomas's approach, emphasizing long-term relationship building and comprehensive support for all parties involved. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the families Thomas had helped, who established their own informal network to support each other and to honor his memory. They created an online community where adoptive families, birth parents, and adult adoptees could share resources, celebrate milestones, and offer support during difficult times. This network became a powerful demonstration of how love and support can transcend geographic boundaries and create lasting connections between people who might never have met otherwise. Thomas's legacy lived on not just in the foundation that bore his name, but in the daily acts of kindness and support that members of this community provided to each other. As winter settled over Lake Serenity, bringing the pristine white silence that Thomas had always loved, Martha Mitchell reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with her husband's mysterious disappearance and evolved into a celebration of his extraordinary life. The lake that had once held only questions now sparkled with answers, hope, and the promise of continued positive impact for generations to come. One particularly meaningful connection was with Rebecca, the woman who had written the letter about her daughter. Rebecca traveled to Cedar Falls to meet Martha in person, and the two women formed an unlikely but strong friendship. Rebecca's daughter, now a teacher as mentioned in the letter, also came to visit, bringing her own children to play by the same lake where their family's story had begun decades earlier. The cave system where Thomas's remains were found was carefully sealed to prevent future accidents, but a small memorial plaque was placed on a boulder near the shore. The inscription read, "Thomas Mitchell, devoted husband, skilled fisherman, and guardian of families. His greatest catch was the love he helped create." As autumn returned to Cedar Falls 1 year after the discovery, Martha Mitchell stood on her dock watching the morning mist rise from Lake Serenity. The water was mirror still, just as it had been on the morning Thomas disappeared. But now, instead of holding secrets and sorrow, the lake seemed to shimmer with hope and healing. Dr. Sarah Chen joined Martha on the dock, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder containing updates on the Foundation's work. Over the past year, they had facilitated 12 adoptions and provided counseling services to dozens of families throughout Montana and neighboring states. "Thomas would be so proud," Sarah said, settling beside Martha on the wooden bench Thomas had built years earlier. Martha smiled, watching a family of ducks glide across the water. "He always said this lake had a way of bringing people together," she replied. "I just never realized how literally true that was." The discovery in Lake Serenity had taught the community of Cedar Falls valuable lessons about love, sacrifice, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Thomas Mitchell's secret work reminded everyone that heroism often comes in quiet, humble forms, that the most profound impacts on human lives sometimes happen without fanfare or recognition. In a world that often feels divided and disconnected, Thomas's story served as a reminder that individual acts of compassion can create ripples that spread far beyond what we can see or imagine. Every child he helped place with a loving family grew up to touch countless other lives, creating an endless network of love and connection that would continue for generations. The town's children, who had grown up hearing the mystery of the missing fisherman, now learned a different lesson from Thomas Mitchell's story. They learned that sometimes the most important work we do in life happens quietly, behind the scenes, without expectation of recognition or reward. They learned that true heroism is often measured not in grand gestures, but in consistent acts of kindness and service to others. Lake Serenity continued to be the heart of Cedar Falls, but now it held an even deeper meaning for the community. It was no longer just a beautiful body of water where people came to fish and swim and gather with their families. It had become a symbol of the hidden depths that exist within all of us, the capacity for love, sacrifice, and service that often remains invisible to the world, but creates the foundation upon which communities and families are built. As the seasons changed, and new families discovered the charm of Cedar Falls, they too became part of Thomas Mitchell's extended legacy. The lake welcomed them all, its peaceful waters reflecting not just the sky above, but the interconnected stories of love, loss, hope, and healing that define the human experience. And sometimes, on very still mornings when the mist hangs low over the water, longtime residents swear they can see a small aluminum boat cutting through the waves near the eastern shore, heading toward the spot where an old tree once stood. They know it's just a trick of the light and shadow, but they smile anyway, comforted by the thought that some love stories never really end. They just transform into something larger and more beautiful than we ever imagined possible. The lake keeps its new secrets now too, not secrets of mystery and sorrow, but secrets of joy and connection. Every ripple on its surface carries with it the memory of lives touched, families created, and love multiplied beyond measure. And in that way, Thomas Mitchell's greatest catch continues to grow, spreading through the waters of Lake Serenity and into the hearts of everyone who hears his story. Martha often found herself thinking about the complexity of love and loss as she watched the seasons change over the lake. Thomas's disappearance had been the most painful experience of her life, but the discovery of his secret work had revealed depths of love and compassion she had never fully appreciated. Her grief had been transformed not into absence but into abundance, an overwhelming awareness of how much good one person could accomplish through quiet, dedicated service. The families who had been touched by Thomas's work continued to stay in contact with each other and with Martha, creating an extended family network that spanned the continent. Weddings were attended by people who had met as strangers in Cedar Falls, but discovered they were connected by Thomas's legacy. Children who had been brought together through his work grew up knowing they were part of something larger than their individual families. Dr. Sarah Morrison, the pediatric surgeon whose adoption had been Thomas's first documented case, established a scholarship fund for medical students interested in working with underserved families. Her career had been shaped by an unconscious understanding of vulnerability and the importance of providing care to those who needed it most, principles that Thomas had modeled throughout his secret work. The ripple effects continued to spread in unexpected ways. Marcus Chen, the architect from Portland, designed the new Family Resource Center in Cedar Falls as a volunteer project, creating a space that reflected Thomas's values of warmth, accessibility, and dignity. The building became a model for similar facilities in other communities, demonstrating how physical spaces could support emotional healing and family formation. Young people who had grown up hearing Thomas's story often chose careers in social services, education, or healthcare, motivated by his example of quiet service. The local high school guidance counselor noted that an unusually high percentage of Cedar Falls graduates pursued helping professions, creating a generation of young adults committed to continuing Thomas's mission in their own ways. The annual Serenity Day celebration had evolved into something much larger than anyone had originally envisioned. Families from across North America planned vacations around the event, bringing their children to learn about adoption, family diversity, and community service. The celebration had become a pilgrimage of sorts for people whose lives had been touched by adoption, whether through Thomas's work or other circumstances. Martha had become a beloved figure at these gatherings, sharing stories about Thomas and offering encouragement to families facing challenges. Her transformation from a grieving widow to a confident advocate demonstrated the healing power of purposeful action and community support. The Foundation's work had expanded beyond adoption services to include support for grandparents raising grandchildren, foster families, and single parents facing crisis situations. Thomas's notebooks had provided a roadmap for compassionate intervention that could be adapted to various family circumstances and challenges. Regional universities began sending students to Cedar Falls to study the Foundation's model of community-based family support. Social work programs incorporated Thomas's approach into their curricula, teaching future professionals about the importance of long-term relationships, cultural sensitivity, and holistic support for families in transition. The lake conservation efforts initiated by Dr. Chen had revealed additional underwater features that spoke to the area's rich natural history. Archaeological artifacts discovered during subsequent cleanups painted a picture of Native American communities that had considered the lake sacred for generations. This discovery added another layer of meaning to Thomas's choice to hide his most precious memories in the lake's depths. Representatives from local tribal communities participated in Serenity Day celebrations, sharing stories about the lake's spiritual significance and the importance of water as a source of life and healing. These cultural exchanges enriched the community's understanding of their natural environment and its role in human healing and connection. As the years passed, Martha began collaborating with a local author to document Thomas's story and the impact of his work. The resulting book became a bestseller, inspiring similar community initiatives across the country and bringing even more attention to the importance of grassroots family support services. The book's success led to speaking opportunities for Martha, who traveled to conferences and universities to share Thomas's story and advocate for community-based approaches to family crisis intervention. Her presentations consistently emphasized that extraordinary impact often comes from ordinary people, willing to act with courage and compassion. Children who had been adopted through Thomas's network began having children of their own, creating a third generation connected to his legacy. These young families often made pilgrimages to Cedar Falls, introducing their children to the lake and the story of the fishermen who had made their families possible. The continuity of these relationships demonstrated the lasting impact of Thomas's careful attention to building sustainable, supportive connections. The foundation established by Cedar Falls had inspired similar organizations in 12 other states, creating a network of rural family support services that shared resources, training, and best practices. Annual conferences brought together social workers, volunteers, and families from across this network, fostering collaboration and continuous improvement in family support methodologies. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's daughter, the teacher who had grown up in the family Thomas had selected for her, eventually moved to Cedar Falls with her own family, drawn by the community's commitment to supporting all kinds of families. Her children attended the same elementary school where Martha had taught, creating another beautiful circle of connection and continuity. Local businesses in Cedar Falls had embraced the community's identity as a place where families were valued and supported. The town's economic development had focused on attracting family-friendly businesses and services, creating employment opportunities that supported the community's values while providing economic stability. The success of the Family Foundation had also attracted grant funding from national organizations interested in supporting innovative approaches to rural family services. These resources allowed the foundation to expand its reach and develop new programs addressing emerging family challenges, such as technology addiction, social media bullying, and economic instability. Martha's personal library had grown to include hundreds of letters, photographs, and updates from families whose lives had been touched by Thomas's work. She maintained correspondence with birth mothers, adoptive families, and adult adoptees, serving as a living link to Thomas's legacy and a source of ongoing support for people navigating complex family relationships. The lake's role as a symbol of healing and connection had attracted the attention of grief counselors and therapists from around the region, who began bringing clients to Cedar Falls for retreats focused on processing loss and finding meaning in difficult experiences. The peaceful environment and the story of Thomas's legacy provided a powerful backdrop for healing work. Local artists had created a sculpture garden near the lake's shore, featuring works inspired by themes of family, connection, and hidden beauty. The garden became a popular destination for quiet reflection and had been the site of numerous proposals, weddings, and family reunions over the years. The discovery in Lake Serenity had ultimately taught the community valuable lessons about the complexity of human experience and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Thomas Mitchell's story reminded everyone that heroism often comes in quiet, humble forms, and that the most profound impacts on human lives sometimes happen without fanfare or recognition. In a world that often feels divided and disconnected, Thomas's legacy served as a powerful reminder that individual acts of compassion create ripples that spread far beyond what we can see or imagine. Every child he helped place with a loving family grew up to touch countless other lives, creating an endless network of love and connection that would continue for generations. The town's children, who had grown up hearing the mystery of the missing fisherman transformed into a story of quiet heroism, learned important lessons about service, sacrifice, and the hidden depths that exist within ordinary people. They understood that true impact often happens behind the scenes, without recognition or reward, but with profound and lasting consequences. As spring returned to Cedar Falls 10 years after the discovery that had changed everything, Lake Serenity reflected not just the sky above, but the interconnected stories of love, loss, hope, and healing that define the human experience. The water that had once held secrets and sorrow now sparkled with the promise of continued connection, and the certainty that love, carefully tended and quietly shared, has the power to transcend even death itself. In the end, the mystery of the missing fisherman had been solved not with tragedy but with triumph. What the divers pulled from the lake wasn't just a metal box filled with photographs and documents. It was proof that love, carefully tended and quietly shared, has the power to transcend even death itself, creating legacies that ripple through time like waves across still water, touching shores we may never see, but forever changing the landscape of human experience. And that perhaps is the most beautiful catch of all, the understanding that every act of love, no matter how small or hidden, becomes part of an eternal current that connects all human hearts across time and space, flowing like the underground springs that feed Lake Serenity, invisible but essential, pure and life-giving, forever. Thomas Mitchell had gone fishing for the last time on a September morning 10 years ago, but what he caught and preserved in the depths of Lake Serenity was something far more precious than any fish. He caught and preserved love itself, ensuring that it would continue to multiply and spread long after his own gentle spirit had returned to the waters that had always been his sanctuary and his home.